So you got a problem with what I'm doing? That's on you today on the Man Space. Welcome to the Man Space podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Welcome, spacemen, to a day where we understand men better. Gather your wives around or your significant others so they can understand who you are as a man and why you do the stuff you do. We have all the answers, as always. On the Man Space? I did it again.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Where is it?
That felt like a double intro.
No, that's the welcome. They've been welcome because I want them to stop and go get their significant others. We had that episode where we did the...
Been inappropriate. Go ahead.
Inappropriate what? It would have been.
It would have been an appropriate.
Right. But it was. But it wasn't. They just get two intros then.
Can I say something real fast?
Please.
This,
I guess.
this might cause some people to self-select out of this episode. Right as we included everybody. But if we haven't made it clear before, this is a podcast for people who are genuinely interested in bettering themselves and their relationships, which is going to involve feeling your feelings, thinking about things.
Bunch of fruits.
So, no, it's funny because I think a lot of these, and there haven't even been a ton, but some of the comments that we've talked about, like on YouTube and things, it's like, well, yeah, dude, then this isn't the freaking podcast for you. Go find something else, and there are plenty that will talk about things exactly the way you're saying. So I think sometimes, we started maybe a bit too broad by saying like, this is for all men, but it isn't really. It's for men who are really interested and women too, like women that are interested in the same things, but like people that are interested in like growing and becoming more connected to themselves and the people around them. So like, if that's not on your radar at all, if that's not important, none of this stuff is going to land with you. And that's okay.
Well, I mean, for some of these people on YouTube, what they're interested in is just commenting on people's crap.
Well, exactly. Right. So that'll still happen, but I think I've listened to a few other people have very specific audiences. And I don't necessarily think that we need to be as specific as some of the ones that I've heard, but I think it does point in a direction like this. The information you're going to get on here is about like growing and connecting. Right. And like, yeah.
And to further clarify something, this is what I do with clients when they come to see me. Like I make sure they understand, like I don't follow a curriculum when I do this. Like I come with the stuff you have. I know the things I'm working towards, and I will put things out there and put things in your head, but I will not necessarily tell you then step 3 is you do this. Yeah. Sometimes I have those things, but this episode, this show is a lot about here's some things that you should be going home and thinking about, we're trusting essentially that you're trying to improve yourself. And some episodes and some topics will not be yours. Like it'll be like, oh, that was interesting, but it's not necessarily anything I'm struggling with. But
yeah.
So I think that too is that we are not here to like give you a step-by-step. This is our proven 9-step program to make you the better man and have the sex you want. Mm-hmm. There's lots of programs like that.
Yeah.
And for some people love them. Yeah. Well, good one. I froze at the very beginning of what you said, so I missed it.
No.
Because somehow still, something's wrong with me and my internet.
You used to blame my internet.
Good news is Google Fiber is going in my I'd say my backyard. It's just over my fence. That's right. Google Fiber finally comes to Round Rock.
To your house, not your office.
No, not my office. I don't know. Maybe they'll be in my office. Maybe they'll come to downtown.
Your office will still be cursed.
Yeah, and even if it wasn't coming to my office, I don't know. Well, whatever. He's fixing that fountain out there, though. You missed it, Mike. He remodeled the office.
Not the drinking fountain.
No. That you may not know that was a fountain, Mike. Right outside your door, that thing.
I do. Yeah. The
He's
water,
like,
one of those waterfall things.
yeah, he's like, I want that fixed. He's like, I like the water. I was like, yeah, it's only been 10 years. That thing broke 10 years ago, man. Like,
You've actually seen it working?
when I came in to the office, he told me, he's like, hey, look, if you could just be kind of the guy who watches this, just make sure the water's not getting too low. I was like, okay. And I came in one day and it was like shooting out the back. And I was like, hey man, there's like water all over the floor shooting out of the back. He's like, just unplug it. So I unplugged it and it sat unplugged. There's probably still water and disease growing in the bottom of that thing. Probably not. I'm sure it's dried up.
You sure you didn't just compartmentalize and forget the fact that when he asked you to take care of it, you felt resentful and went and kicked it?
I actually got a little X-Acto knife out and mess with.
Hey man, it just broke.
Buddy, I don't understand what happened. So let me share as we get into this idea and why I liked your this topic is I want to share with you, spacemen, a story I just shared with the admiral and rear captain. What was that? What are your guys' roles
in the spaceship? I don't.
Yeah, who are you guys? I can't remember. What's Mike doing?
Remember.
Mike's taking us on a space voyage.
I think Mike was a self-appointed rear admiral because I don't think we would give him that position.
I was not a self-appointed rear admiral.
What? I like the way you say it. I don't think we'd give him that position.
Well, because it's an insult, isn't it? The rear admiral?
Right.
It feels like one.
I would have given it to him, but I didn't know that term.
I
So
was
I feel
going to
like
say,
I got
Rob
it from
would
Matt.
have.
I got the term from Matt, and then I said, that's Mike. All right. So anyway, here's the story. I met with another, we'll say a colleague, kind of in the mental health field, different subset. And at the end of our meeting, she said, hey, look, I've always wanted to ask a couples therapist this. I had a few friends who ended up going to couples therapy and then getting divorced. She said all three of them said at some point their therapist pulled them aside, pulled the female aside alone and said, hey, look, you should jump ship. He's a narcissist. And that's not going to change.
Like as they were walking out the door?
No, I think it was like, let's have individuals.
Hey, hold back.
What'd she tell you? Nothing. Don't worry about it. She just said, you look nice in those flats. Where'd you get them? I think she just in some individual sessions basically said, he's a narcissist and this isn't going to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a number of problems with that. Here's a few of them. And then we'll move into what I think, like I was trying to say to her, like, no, this is the way men get mislabeled because we do some things that will look similar. Some of our defense mechanisms, which is what we're talking about today, that are not necessarily good or bad. They're things that we do in some situations, just like ethics. It's like, yeah, okay, that's probably it's probably even a good thing to do here, but in other situations, it's like, don't do that. This isn't the time for that. But I told her I've worked with, and the spacemen have heard this before, but I've told her I've worked with 3 narcissists in my career. So it's nowhere near as prevalent as social media would have you believe. Also, what's happening and what really bothers me about that is what these therapists have just done, not the woman I was talking to, what these therapists have just done is essentially told this female partner, none of this is your fault. The relationship is the way it is because he's a narcissist and he has problems. You should get out and go find somebody who doesn't have problems, which means she just set them up for failure in their next relationships. Partly because they're also going to say, hey, you're acting like my ex-husband used to act. You're probably also a narcissist. And if you don't know it, you're a covert narcissist. So there's no way out of that. You're just a narcissist. I know. And so, and then I see these emails periodically from other therapists saying, I'm looking for a therapist who can help this woman leave a relationship with a narcissistic partner. And a lot of the therapists that will respond will say, I'm a therapist, a female in my 50s, and I have my own personal experience living with a narcissist. And it bothers me a lot that it means whenever that happens, it means there's nothing I have to look at about myself. Even when they say, no, I got my stuff, but he's a narcissist. That bothers me a lot. But also it takes men and what they're doing out of context and doesn't understand or explore the underlying patterns that need to be looked at and shifted. And so I think, like in a lot of those cases, I think, look, one of the things I told her was men are not very well trained. We don't do this with each other, and we don't have a lot of examples of it, of how to like take ownership of what we're feeling and express it in ways that would be helpful or meaningful to ourselves or to the relationship. And so we do things that sometimes it's like checking out. We look aloof, like we don't care, or we'll take it upon ourselves to fix things and then make it look like, look what I did for you. Like kind of like you owe me. All things that could look, depending on how you frame them, they could look narcissistic. Instead of saying, oh, I mean, in this situation, like when somebody, if a dude acts aloof, it's like I had somebody earlier today, and she said he wants to leave. I can tell he doesn't even care. He doesn't care about any of this. He's just waiting for me to leave so he doesn't have to look like a bad guy because that's all he cares about. And I said, just so you know, if I saw you guys as a 7th grade couple, you look like the hot cheerleader and he's the nerdy kid who's running around trying to carry your books all the time. Like this dude is so like, but he doesn't like, I'd ask him questions. I'd ask, what do you want? And every single time he would pause and he'd say, well, she's really good at this and this and this. And so this, and I'd be like, he wouldn't tell me what he wanted. He'd be like, so I'm not going to do this. Like he would spin around like, screw that. I'm not doing that. I was like, so finally I turned to her and said, am I getting an answer to my question? She goes, no, you're not. And she saw that as like, he's trying to manipulate the situation. It's like, no, probably he knows that if he says something the wrong way, it's going to blow up in his face. He goes, it's that one. I don't want this to blow up in my face. Which sounds, like I said, one way of framing this is he's very cut off and disconnected and he's a narcissist. He doesn't care, but he's not going to look bad. That's her problem, right? That's on you. The other way of looking at it is saying the dude's freaked out. But she doesn't see this as a coping mechanism or a defense mechanism. She sees it as narcissism. Mm-hmm. Which, honestly, statistically speaking, we can't all be narcissists. And then someone who's listening is like, that's just what a narcissist wants to say. I can't even say it. Okay.
I did a little search where you're looking just because the numbers have always fascinated me. And they're actually a little bit higher than I thought they were.
I've seen these numbers and I have some disagreement with these numbers, but go ahead.
So I thought the DSM actually had them a little bit lower than whatever article I found.
Yeah, the DSM, the one that's the standard for it, as opposed to this article you found on the internet.
Well, if that's the thing, I can't. It's from an actual. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The numbers are close, just slightly lower than, or slightly higher than what I remembered. Their numbers were that it affects between 0.5% of the population, and up to as high as 5% of the population. So I thought,
they're talking about narcissism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, so if we're talking about narcissists, like if it's the high end, which is very unlikely,
5%,
5 out of 100 people are going to be narcissists. And keep in mind, it is not a male, like it is not a female can be a narcissist. Yes, there's a higher prevalence of it in males, but a female can be a narcissist. So I think, 5 out of 100. And chances are it's much less, right? Well, if it's on the low end, 1/2 of a person out of 100, it would take 200 people for you to find one narcissist.
Well, but here's the other, even that, as low as that is, you still have to keep in mind this idea that when it comes to things like personality disorders or mental health issues, you can't run a blood test that shows like, look, your blood levels are elevated. No. You have this. Right. It is somebody's reporting that. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is it's either an outside therapist reporting this guy's a narcissist. It's very likely not the narcissist saying, I'm a narcissist. So I'm going to write down all these things on, and there's ways of, hopefully ways in measures to kind of root out manipulating the questions, but we know from our soft sciences that they're not always super great. Or it's the spouse saying they're a narcissist. And so we have to give these estimates of like at most 5%. So it's low, but TikTok would have you believe 80% of your males that are probably narcissists. Anyway,
Yeah.
The whole point of that story was not to get lost in this narcissist hole. That's a weird phrasing.
That's what a narcissist does, man.
But it was to kind of get at this idea of like, what if there's a different way of looking at some of what we're seeing? So we've, not to steal your thunder, Matt, but I should say Matt has found some. Well, you just found them, right? And you have a book, this one's from an article, but we just picked. What did we pick? 5? I have 5 on my screen.
We threw out 5. We'll see which ones we talk about in depth, but yeah.
We just picked we tried to pick, I think, out of these 10, what I, at least from my perspective, I was thinking, with these ones I think I see the most often. Mm-hmm. In terms of defensive behaviors. Is that what we're calling them?
Defense mechanisms, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I mean, it's kind of funny. Like speaking of defense mechanisms, I always think of, what is it?
Clue.
Is it Clue? It's my defense mechanism.
If I were the killer, I'd kill you next. If. I said if.
It's an if. I had a client recently who he was very uncomfortable. He just kept laughing and laughing. He goes, I don't usually do this. I don't know why I'm laughing so hard. I was like, well, I do. You feel real uncomfortable. Anyway, let's list off the ones we have. And then we'll clarify them.
Well, list off the ones you have.
The ones that and some of these are wordings. These are the ones that I wrote down. Projection, compartmentalization, intellectualization, rationalization, and displacementization. Displacement. Right? Are those the ones we kind of settle on? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So, Matt, you've got the list there. If we start, let me just say this. It seems like, no, I don't know if I could pick in that list. If you guys had to pick and say, this is the one I see the most, what would it be?
For men?
Yeah, for men. Projection, compartmentalization, intellectualization, rationalization, or displacementization.
I would say compartmentalization is the one I see the most. And I don't even think a lot of guys would call it a defense mechanism. They would say that's what I've been told to do.
Yeah.
I've been told to keep work at work and to be present at home and to, and I don't think that that's like what the defense mechanism is about. But I think that's more like behaviorally how it looks, I guess. I think for the way that I see it the most is like, I've got, kind of like you were saying with the example you shared with that guy, like I've got thoughts and feelings about things that I would never share with my wife because it wouldn't go well. Mm-hmm. So I compartmentalize and I share that with, this group of people, this guy, and in a lot of cases, this other woman, right? Like, so I'm existing in kind of like fractions everywhere I go. But maybe like the area of their lives where they feel like I can be the most myself, like I feel the most relaxed. Like I try to white knuckle the hard situations in life and just put up with them, but then I have my escape. And I can tell myself and kind of build an emotional world where those two experiences never collide.
Yeah.
That's the one I see the most. But
I think that's interesting if you, in that context, because in my head, because Mike, you agree with him, right? Compartmentalization was the one you feel like. I thought first of intellectualization, which we'll talk about in a second, because I see it happen a lot.
I think it probably helps to say I do a lot of work with infidelity too, so that might be why I see a
that's
lot more
interesting.
Compartmentalization. But
I was going to say I also do. That's like one of my specialties, and so I feel like it's interesting. I don't know that I was looking at it in that context, in that lens, the compartmentalization within infidelity, but I do think if we took compartmentalization the way you just described it, it's not just saying, well, I do share some things with this person and then other things with this person. Sometimes it's like I don't share with anybody, but I compartmentalize it and then I quote unquote share it with these acting out behaviors. Like these are, I switch into like the things we talked about before are coping mechanisms like, alcohol or anger or pornography or whatever. It's like I'll compartmentalize it and put it into that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I broaden the compartmentalization into this space of like I put it into this thing, and I think, oh yeah, I can say, oh, I see that a lot. I mean, I can say for sure that no question. Maybe actually in my head, I think these other ones all kind of build off of compartmentalization. They require first that I take this thing and shove it.
Yeah, no, and I guess that's a good point too, because even if you're thinking of situations that don't involve acting out behaviors, it's like the compartmentalization is like I put something in a closet, like we've talked about this before on like our double standard episode, and that's where maybe projection and other things come in, right? Like if I have a sense that my needs don't fit here, or part of what I think or feel doesn't matter, then I just compartmentalize, meaning I cut it off. But it doesn't just go away, lot of, I think when you're in that intellectualization mode, you can tell yourself, oh, I don't have any feelings about it, but you clearly do, because it's somewhere and it'll come out later, either in the form of you escaping into something, or you blowing up and everybody like, whoa, what's wrong with you? You should put that away. Right. It's like,
yeah.
And then it's easy to go right back into that same mode of, sure, okay, now that I brought it out of the closet and dusted it off, it's ready to go back in. And I think just naturally, that's probably been part of a lot of guys' experiences, especially because of some of the male socialization stuff we talked about, where it's like we learn pretty early on what parts of ourselves to show and bring to different situations and what part to tuck away or kill off or try to,
Yeah. Which is, I mean, earlier today I was, all things relate to earlier today. I was working with somebody and they said, she was describing her husband. He has always, like, money and how much money you make has always been a big deal for him. Like, it's a way he kind of measures, she didn't say it quite this way, but measures masculinity. And I think, yes, in some areas, right? With this guy, with these men, with other people, will kind of measure himself this way. And this is thinking along this line of compartmentalization of like, what do you put yourself forward this way in some areas, in some ways in this areas? Like I got to shove these parts down when I'm here. Like he's not going to be in a room with other dudes who are professionals and talking about his feelings. Over here, he's going to be showing off how much money he has, which could look, by the way, narcissistic. He's always talking about how much money he makes. And I think, or he's just trying to prove that he's got value as a human.
Yeah.
Which I don't consider narcissistic. I consider that's what all of us do in some way. But that compartmentalization, I guess in my head at first I was thinking just of stuffing things. And I was like, well, even in that context, I think, yeah, I know people who stuff a lot, but even that idea of presenting different selves to in different places, I think, oh yeah, that's interesting. You have to be careful and calculated about what you show. It's the way you protect yourself so you can be all things in all places.
Well, and it is, I think it's beneficial to point out there are times when that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like I think we've talked about it on here before. When I was teaching, I was teaching, I was a student, I was, in a position of responsibility at church, and I lived highly compartmentalized because it's how I kept everything straight. And I, like, the person I needed to be a successful teacher didn't, like, there was no reason to bring that guy out when I was hanging out with my friends. It's totally different aspects of my personality. And so I was just like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't need that guy. He can stay over there. The guy I was with my friends, I couldn't be in a room full of 8-year-olds. And so, like, you kind of learn how to separate those pieces of yourself.
Yeah.
And so there is benefit to it. And there's even times when, like, emotionally there's benefit to it. Emotionally saying, yeah, now's not an appropriate time for me to let that emotion guide what happens. I think of the story our dad told Rob about when he lost, when they lost Stuart. My mom had a baby they lost 2 days after birth. And my dad told me a story once about crying on his dad's shoulder. And he said, and after a few minutes, his dad said, okay, you need to put it away and you need to go, be a husband for your wife. And you need to go and be her support right now. And I think, no, that was I have some mixed feelings about that, but I think, no, that was an appropriate time to say, this doesn't just affect you. You have to go and be able to support. And I think as parents, for sure, this happens a lot. A lot of times as a parent, we have to put aside our thing, our emotion, to say, hey, let me climb into where you are and see what this is like for you.
Yeah, that is a good, like we said in the beginning, all these, they could have good times to do them. And I think that's a good example that sometimes you do have to say, I'm putting mine aside. I'm going to compartmentalize this so I can be present. Actually, good empathy sometimes requires that I can put my own stuff aside so I can show up the way I need to and get into yours.
Yeah, which to me, where it becomes a defense mechanism is when I do it out of, like, avoidance.
Yeah.
I want to avoid the discomfort of this. I want to avoid the interaction that's going to come. I want to avoid. Okay. So at that point, now we're getting into an area where maybe that's not the best use of compartmentalization.
Well, and especially if it's like, I do this all the time.
Right.
Anytime you do anything all the time, I think, unless it's like openly expressing, I feel like, but then that makes you, what was the comment? You guys are fruits. So,
I mean,
like it said fruits. So it's like, who says fruits anymore? So let's be, in the interest of time, because there's more. Let's move on to intellectualization, because Matt, you were saying something. I was like, maybe I need to reframe. You got that thing there. Can you read us what the definition is for this according to this article?
When you're hit with a trying situation, you may choose to remove all emotion from your responses and instead focus on quantitative facts. You may see this strategy in use when a person spends their days creating spreadsheets of job opportunities and leads after they are let go from a job. Or, as I did, dreaming about leaving a job, namely a university.
An unnamed university. So
yeah,
that one's that one I feel like, oh man, I see that happen in real time in my office all the time. And actually, if we start with the good ends of that, I think that is not a bad thing. That's actually, like, I just lost a job. I need to sit down and make a spreadsheet. It's like, take some action, remove some emotion from this to a point, right? To be able to sit down and say, okay, this is what my plan would be. And you can also freak out. Like the freak out could come later. That's the part of like, you don't want to just cut it off and say, no, I had no emotion. I had no response to it. Again, though it may sound impossible, I worked with somebody this morning and we were talking about
how many people did you see this morning?
5 already.
I'm just kidding.
And we were talking about, like, his mood was very different. Like, I could tell, like, dude, you were not in the same mood. But he's like, no, I'm fine. And it's like, I've got some stress, but it's fine. And but then we talked about an incident that had occurred a few months back, and he, like emotional, suddenly I was like, what's that? What just came up out of your face? And he was like, I can't, um, he just kind of, he's like, oh, what are you talking about? I was like, whatever you're feeling, like something's coming up. I think you're feeling this stuff all the time. You just don't know it because you are so good at kind of compartmentalizing and intellectualizing, just going into, look, this is what I have to do. This is what has to be done. And so I'll do these things to get these things done. And you're ignoring totally the stuff that's just building and building and building over time. And so I think in those contexts, like when you ignore it and all you ever do is intellectualize, and this is what's infuriating about working with couples sometimes, is when you get a male, but this isn't only males who do this, but we're talking about males, a male who intellectualizes to a point where it's basically like a trump card. Like, well, I'm using reality and science and logic and facts. And then I'll watch them use those facts and logic in very emotional ways. Like you can hear their tone escalating. I'm like, I said, look, dude, if this is logic, this is a different session this morning. Just run the gamut this morning. If this is logic, why is there so much emotion in it? Do you get this way when you're doing math? Like it's an equation. You just plug it in. You only get that way doing math when you feel like, crap, I'm going to get a bad grade. And you start getting pissed at it. But I think it's funny to watch how often men will use this, or they'll say they're using it, but it's driven by emotion. So,
well, and I think that's the point of this definition too, right? It's when you're hit with a trying situation.
Right.
So that's it's your defense against like the strong emotions that you're feeling.
Right. To switch into something that sounds logical and clean and exact.
Yeah. Like I'm going to, and some people, like you said, will state that very overtly. Like I'm doing this because there shouldn't be any emotion in this situation. I want to make this, decision clear-headed, and like I don't want emotions to influence it. That's actually where I think we get a lot of these comments from maybe guys who are wanting to approach things that way. Yeah. Is like, no, emotions are all they're going to do is get in the way. And it's like exactly true when you're trying to, decide on what car to buy.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a relationship, I don't think that it's important, or I don't think that it's wise to let that overwhelm your system. But back emotions. To compartmentalization, right? It's like, if I've got strong feelings about the way you are treating me, like what's the cost of me sharing that with you right now? Right? Will it get labeled as projection? Will you tell me I'm just making it all about me? Or, any number of things that you'll say if I try to share what I'm feeling. And I do think we trick men here a lot, right? Honestly, like as I look back through couples therapy, I think it's like a complicit trick, because I think they're in on it too. Like they're getting something from it. Yeah. But I think, like we've said before, because in couples therapy, generally speaking, women are more likely to raise issues and articulate their concerns, and men are going to be more defaulting towards like conflict avoidance. We hand men the skill of listening, and we say, okay, right now, default to listening. She's talking about how she's feeling. So let's not talk about how you're feeling right now. Right. And then we'll come back around to how you are feeling. But the majority of what he's feeling in that moment has to do with how she is feeling and talking to him. And so once he listens and that's calmed down, then we're like, okay, how do you feel? He's kind of like, oh, I'm fine. And he probably is telling the truth, right?
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah.
Because he's now compartmentalized and said, well, whatever was bothering me before isn't happening now. So I've just cut myself off from that memory and let's just move forward, right?
Which I actually found like that would happen to me with a handful of couples that I worked with, where, right, like I would see the husband having a reaction, but I'd say like, no, stay with what she's saying. Mm-hmm. And then we'd get back and it's what you just described. And I learned I had to say, hey, when she was talking, what were you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I had to shift it away from feelings because he would, and I had to say what thoughts were running through your head. And that's where I would pull it out. But because of that, right? It's that idea of like, no, but I get it now. I see it, which I think is how often, like, I think one of the more common ways that I see the intellectual, no, whatever. It's one of the ways I see it is that they will sit and connect the dots for how did I arrive at this feeling I'm feeling? Well, now I understand it, so I don't have to keep feeling it. Right? Like, well, but it makes sense. So, okay, it's fine because it makes sense. Or, well, I can see why she's upset, so it's okay. And I'm like, no, like, I don't care how much sense it makes. Like, initially it bothered you. Let's talk about that. Right? Let's talk about the emotion that came up for you, not what you did with it. I don't want to know what happened after. I want to know what happened before.
Yeah. You gonna cut this lull?
I couldn't. I sat there actually thinking, my screen just froze. So if Mike stops talking and they both just look at me, they're going to think, "What are you doing, Rob?" It's kind of funny because in the interest of time, I still want to move. We have 3 more I want to kind of talk about a little bit.
And you froze again,
kind of
so we'll keep going.
And hopefully we'll just.
I say, what's another one on your list, Matt?
Oh, did I cut out again?
You did.
Dang it!
For a long chunk. So we were just shifting to when the compartmentalization or the container doesn't hold, right? That's kind of like what we're talking about with displacement. So that's when you direct strong emotions and frustrations towards a person or object that doesn't feel threatening. So somebody who's maybe going to be really empathic or just really supportive. So it says this allows you to satisfy the impulse to react, but you don't risk significant consequences. So the example they share is getting angry at your child or spouse after you've had a bad day. But even though neither of them, I think that's where when men are like having a hard time not showing that they're frustrated, like we've talked about way back, like somebody coming up and saying what's wrong, how like what's going on for you, makes it difficult in that moment not for displacement to happen, right? Because it's like I'm trying not to displace all this onto you, but I'm coming home because I want to, honor my commitment to the family and all that stuff. But we've talked about ways to kind of just basically say something simple like, this isn't about you, I just had a bad day, right? And that's what you're seeing. But I do think I see this one a lot with guys who have a really hard time saying no and have really poor boundaries with everybody else in their life. And so like the only time they allow those strong feelings to even show are when they're in the safety of their own home. And then, it's like the people that matter most end up catching the worst of everything that guy's picked up throughout the day.
Which is actually something like I'll often, when I'm talking with clients about like, when do you decide it's time to address a problem with your spouse? That's one of the things that we'll kind of address, right? Like I'll encourage them to look at the context. Like I remember there was one day I was cleaning the bathroom. It was a Friday after work when I was teaching, and I was cleaning the bathroom, and it had been a long, crappy day, and I was irritated that I was cleaning the bathroom, and all I could think was, how come I'm always the one that cleans the bathroom? It was like, how come she never cleans the bathroom? I thought, oh, I'm going to go say something. I'm going to be like, Jenner, how come you never clean the bathroom?
With the toilet brush in hand. Toilet.
And I paused for a second, and I thought, wait a minute. I do this like every week. Why this week do I feel a need to go talk to Jenner about it? Why didn't I feel that need last week or the week before? And I realized that day my boss had come in and laid into the third grade team, which I was part of, and didn't give us a chance to respond at all. And I felt it was unjustified and incorrect that she was coming after us. And then I just had to sit and hold it. Like I had nowhere to put it. Mm-hmm. And it almost went to Jenner because, right, she became like, here, this thing came up. And in that instance, it's not like it wasn't an entirely unprovoked thing. No, there was a legitimate, right? There's a potential for a legitimate conversation there. Hey, I feel like I'm the only one that's ever cleaned, and can we talk about the distribution of whatever around the house responsibilities? That's a legitimate conversation, but the only thing driving it that day was my boss made me feel like a piece of crap. Mm-hmm. and I, like, it was going to go somewhere. It went into scrubbing the toilet.
Scrub the crap out of that toilet, literally.
So clean.
That's an interesting. We've talked about exercise before. I think sometimes maybe the productive version of displacement, to me, if you want to call it this, maybe I'm just finding a different way to put this, is that instead of like taking it out on my kids or something like that, is that I'd funnel it into something. And then in order to say, okay, I know I'm upset about this, I'm going to funnel this into this. It's going to be the cleanest toilet ever. And then I'm going to go have a conversation with my wife about, hey, the toilet thing is a little unbalanced, or I funnel it into exercising, and then I go and talk to my wife and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this. And then exactly. I pause. No, there, see, it's just brief.
Well, and I think that's like, proper placement. Like you said, because displacement is placing it somewhere where it doesn't belong. So we should probably circle back around to this.
Okay.
Because there's a lot more we could talk about here.
I guess we're done. Well, before we get back to circling around, here's my thought is everybody has defense mechanisms that we use.
Yeah.
Sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. One of the things I wanted to do today was two things. There's two things I wanted to do today. One was I wanted to dispel this myth that all these things that we're doing are always unhealthy. Look, I can still see you guys.
Perfect timing.
I'm going to keep talking because I'm still moving and you guys are still moving. So I don't know what's frozen.
Okay.
But I want to dispel this myth that all the things we do are unhealthy and they're probably narcissistic. And I want to be able to say, hey, look at some of these things. We all do them. What things can you take of this and say,
okay.
Yes. What things can you take from this?
The fact that everything we do is narcissistic.
No, dispel.
That's like, Rob, I think you missed the point.
Dispel the idea that everything we do is narcissistic, and then say some of the stuff we do, they're not all bad. It's just like everything we try to do on the show. Like we do stuff. You don't have to say this is good or bad. It's like understanding why you do it, and is there a way to approach these things in a healthy way?
I don't know what you're saying, so I'm just going to say, like we do. No.
We'll assume that caught that. It says it's fine on my screen.
Sure.
It says it's 99% uploaded. So then I guess come back and catch the continuing saga of Rob's internet, and we'll keep looking at our defense mechanisms. Next time on the Man Space?
Please?
Please?